Let's move away from Nigeria and go to South Africa this morning. Eskom has confirmed that the South African National Defence Force has been deployed to certain power stations. Members of the army were stationed at 4 power stations, which are Majuba, Camden, Grootvlei, I beg your pardon, and Tutuka in the eastern Mpumalanga province on Saturday afternoon.
Theft and sabotage have cost Eskom billions of rands in damages and losses at a time when the company and the country cannot afford it. Now, load shedding is currently at stage 6 until further notice after 8 generating units at Eskom's power stations broke down. We'll talk about this some more as we have joining us to share some insight on this story, the energy expert Shekmo Kadima. Thank you very much for joining us. Eskom has on several occasions mentioned that it's dealing with crime and vandalism on its largest power stations. We know that Eskom has been very unstable. We've been following the news, talking about it, the resignation, of the Eskom leader. But let's talk about the deployment. Did this come as a shock to the public? Was it something that was expected?
You must bear this in mind. Just this very past week, the CEO, the outgoing CEO, the minister, as well as the chair of the board, they addressed the media about the departure of the CEO. They never once hinted to the fact that they were going to take this unprecedented step of bringing in the army onto what effectively is a civilian workplace. So it is totally bizarre that they have taken this action. And secondly, the National Assembly, which is Parliament, has not been duly informed that the president intended to deploy the army at such a very national key point. And also, if anything, this tells us that the management of Eskom, the government, they have totally lost control. And I am astonished that the newly appointed members of the board of Eskom, not a single one of them has resigned in protest, because the step of bringing in the army is unprecedented on the one hand, but also just 2 months ago, we saw Eskom making an announcement that they have hired the company Bidvest, where the president still has got active shareholding, beneficial financial interest in that company, that they hired Bidvest to provide security services, not only to Eskom, but to the Passenger Rail Association of South Africa, as well as the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, known as PRASA, as well as Transnet, which operates the rail network overall on the freight side. That they've now employed this private company to provide security services, and that they had granted this private company sort of quasi-law enforcement powers to be able to arrest and therefore be able to refer such person to the National Prosecuting Authority. And that contract comes in at such an amount of money which Eskom cannot afford. And here now we have been told that the army is coming in. It's an absurdity in the extreme, but a confirmation that we are in a calamitous situation in South Africa. And that which I have been warning about, that the national grid of the country is on the verge of collapse, unfortunately is now imminent and unavoidable.
I want you to speak on the allegations of vandalism, and because there's thoughts that the army or security personnel that have been positioned there are there to protect Eskom and its facilities from vandalism and from people who might be trying to sabotage the establishment. So let's talk about that. Is that true? Are there, those fears, and is the security agents, are they really going to help, or that is just a false narrative?
It is utter nonsense. It is false narrative. It's only going to exacerbate what is already a dire situation. The minister responsible, the president, the board of Eskom, the management, they have been talking for the best part of the last 3 years about allegations of sabotage to Eskom's plant infrastructure and equipment. They have never once adduced evidence that can be an arrest of persons who can be prosecuted in a open court in South Africa under our criminal justice system. It's a complete fallacy that there's been acts of vandalism. Some of the incidences that they refer to, those are incidences which management supposed to be in control of. For example, delivery of substandard coal of coal that has got foreign material such as rocks and steel or fragments of metal in it, which damages the plant, the boilers of Eskom. That is for management. The question that Eskom management have never been able to answer, even once, is that why do they continue to pay for coal that does not meet the specification which they of the boilers that they operate? Why do they continue to receive? Because that is within their control. There can be no allegation sustainably so of sabotage or vandalism when they are the ones that are actually totally in charge, not only in terms of receiving the various services which are not according to standard, but also they go on to proceed to pay for such services or for such goods, and therefore it can't be sustained that that can constitute vandalism. Here we have got a totally inept, indolent, grossly incompetent management as well as the portfolio minister, and therefore the problems are compounded by that very thing. And this knee-jerk reaction of attempting to deploy the army in an area where they are not suited for is unfortunately going to take an already dire situation and exacerbate it into the worst levels ever.
Let's talk about Andrew Doreta's exit from Eskom, which of course kicks in next year, but his resignation has been handed over. Some of the stories surrounding his legacy and the legacy that he's left at Eskom haven't been the most positive, although there are mixed reactions. There are people who have complained that he's reduced load shedding, or rather increased SA's hours of load shedding from 530 to 1,600 hours, and that Eskom has recorded a loss of 20 billion rand in the 4 consecutive years. Now, there are arguments that a new CEO won't solve Eskom's problems. Do you share the same sentiment? And what are your thoughts on Andre Doreta?
Look, Andre Doreta, I want record to say he should never have been given the job based on his atrocious track record at the 2 previous companies where he worked. He should never have been given the job. Now, to delay his departure to March 2023 is going to be disastrous for Eskom. That man should have been fired and he should have left Eskom this very past week. And hence, we now even seen the army being brought in because of his gross incompetence. But the new CEO who comes in, there are 5 major decisions that such CEO must take. The first and foremost decision is that Eskom must cancel all the so-called take or pay coal supply contracts, where Eskom is paying for equivalent of 20 million tons of coal. They never even take delivery of 1 wheelbarrow of that 20 million tons of coal they pay for. That is on the one instance. The second instance is the so-called independent power producers, who currently they purport to have 6,000 megawatts of power connected to the grid. Not even one single usable megawatt hour or kilowatt hour ever reaches a customer in this country. So it constitutes a fruitless and wasteful expenditure on Eskom, which costs at least 143 million rand every single calendar day. They must stop the use of diesel. That is decision number 3. Stop the use of diesel. Decision number 4, fire at least 300 bloated management structure, which is at head office at Megawatt Park, where there are 300 managers who are doing absolutely nothing, any millions of rands every year. Those people must go because they bring about confusion in the decision-making processes, in the efficient running operations of a Eskom. And then the 5th decision that must be taken immediately is to abandon any further capital expenditure on the 2 power stations that are supposedly new, Majuba and Kusele, and then return to service at least 9,000 to 12,000 megawatts of the power stations that they have mothballed already, that they have shut down under the guise of trying to meet the greenhouse gas emissions levels. They must return those to service. Those are the 5 decisions. Anyone who takes on the position of Chief Executive Officer of Eskom must have the fortitude, must have the guts, must have the courage to take these very hard decisions if we are to save the entire country of South Africa, because the whole architecture, economic architecture of South Africa is premised, the foundation is reliable energy which Eskom must supply. The belief that privateers, private companies can give us energy security is a absurdity in the extreme, and it must be cancelled. That policy must be abandoned with immediate effect if South Africa is to survive. But if you still have a situation whereby the government, the board of Eskom, and everybody else are telling us that for the greenhouse gas emissions, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions, when we only contribute 0.4% of global emissions. The question is, what difference can South Africa make? So we have here nothing but corruption and stealing that is on steroids. Hence, we are having this situation we have now where they insist that we must do everything to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions when we are not a big factor in the world. And globally, the biggest emitters, whether it is India, China, the United States, Europe in totality, they have only now increased their usage of fossil fuels, and that has got direct bearing on the volume of greenhouse gas emissions they are emitting, and they are not even taking the consideration that South Africa is taking, because in Europe alone, higher energy costs that come from introducing the so-called independent power producers and the war in Ukraine means that at least 147,000 Europeans are going to die this winter from high energy costs that they cannot afford and the freezing winter period that they are going to experience in Europe. So we are taking the steps that at the end of the day make no difference, but all of this is motivated by nothing but corruption, rampant corruption. Hence, they can take such bizarre and absurd decisions.
All right. Well, it's obvious that the load shedding will continue and might even get worse in South Africa. To speak on that, and also, you know, what does this say about the ratings of President Cyril Ramaphosa's government since he came into power?
Well, as you are aware, the African National Congress is going through its national conference. They last night were electing what they call now the new top 7, which are the officials. And of course, that includes a president. Whether or not he will prevail, he will once again win by a very narrow margin, a much more narrower margin than the previous time. That's ways to be seen. We will know later today. But if he loses this conference, there's going to be a reverberating effect, I can assure you that. The ministers, the cabinet that currently is there is going to have to collapse itself if he loses the conference of the ANC today. Because on the ratings front, he can't be any more popular. We know that even in 2019, when we went to national elections, he had a much more drastically reduced majority of the ANC. The ANC has the least number of voters than ever since democracy in 1994. So if anything, the trajectory, if he wins this election, will continue, and therefore the ANC will once and for all be out of power, which is what South Africans desperately need, based on the policy decisions, whether on the economy, socially, and otherwise, that the ANC government has been taking. So if anything, 2024, the ANC will be out of power. We'll see a coalition government. But what happens between now and 2024? That is the big question. And will the ANC have the gumption, have the fortitude to be able to come up with policy positions that can rescue us, that can redeem us from this untenable situation? I doubt that very much, because this elective conference has been about nothing other than the personalities. There has been no contestation of ideas. There's been no arguments or debates about what is the appropriate and efficient policy position that South Africa must take on several key important fronts, macroeconomic policy being one of those, because energy falls within the industrial policy of a nation, and without energy, then the country cannot grow economically. So right. Yes, Cyril Ramaphosa is not as popular as he would have been maybe even in 2017. He wasn't that popular. What we know as a matter of course is that he bribed the electorate, the delegates who voted for him in 2017.
Is this confirmed? Is this confirmed?
This juncture, in this election, there has once again been incidences of bribery for people to be able to vote. But we, as South Africans, the entire country of South Africa is suffering as a result of what happens within the ANC.
I mean,
so
you're saying that, permit me to interject at this point, you're saying that the president bribed. Are these allegations or are they confirmed?
They are allegations. During the Zondo Commission, he himself admitted to having used money, having used as much as 300 million rand to be able to secure the win in the 2017 electoral conference. Just very recently, the man who has been his envoy, who has been using the state resources, traveling on a diplomatic passport, Bejani Chauke, has admitted that in fact, he had the money, he had the means, and also he has been able to buzz people during the discussion within the National Executive Committee of the ANC, where they were discussing on whether or not they should vote to adopt, or for Parliament to adopt, the Section 89 Independent Panel report. And during those meetings of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, again, there was evidence that was adduced showing that this man, who is a close ally of the president, actually had rented a crowd and had bought favor with a lot of people. And he himself went on one of the newspapers recently in preparing for this national conference.
Okay.
That in fact he had the monetary means to be able to buy the voters or the delegates, and there has been allegations even as early as last night, this very past night, that there has been allegations of people being bribed with 20,000 rand per person to be able to vote.
It sounds like
those are serious allegations.
It sounds like, never-ending drama, if I can call it that, from the South African government, and of course, these power outages and load shedding and the chaos with Eskom, it's just not ending. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. We would love to speak with you again, and see, if the army is able to actually make any effect and improve on the situation over there. Thanks for your time once again.
The army will make things worse, unfortunately, but have a good day.